The cold void of space had never seemed so suffocating. For Admiral Kira Davin, every breath she took inside the command center felt heavier than the last, each one a reminder of the impending collapse of Earth's defenses. The Xalith, an ancient and merciless species, had driven humanity to the edge of extinction. Their forces were overwhelming, their technology far more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. Planetary defenses had crumbled, and the few remaining human ships were scattered across the far reaches of the galaxy, each desperately evading the Xalith fleet. Earth had become a target in the cold, silent dark of space, and the Xalith were closing in. Davin leaned over the control console, her fingers grazing the touch-sensitive interface as she examined the latest intel. A report flashed on the screen. Xalith invasion fleet, 50% engagement complete. Earth defenses at critical levels. Damn it, she muttered under her breath. She stood straight, facing the darkened bridge. The crew, a mix of seasoned officers and young recruits, moved about in tense silence. No one spoke unless necessary. It was as though the very air itself had turned oppressive. The once bustling command center, filled with chatter and urgency, now felt like the last bastion of a dying species. Across the room, Lieutenant Jace Marlowe stood by a holographic map, studying the positions of both human and Xalith fleets. He was one of the youngest officers in Earth's Navy, but his intellect and strategic mind had earned him the respect of his peers. Marlowe turned, sensing Davin's eyes on him, and walked over. "Admiral, we're losing the fleet," Marlowe said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the weight of the situation. "If we don't act soon, we're finished." Davin nodded grimly, looking up at the flickering map. The Xalith were relentless, sweeping across star systems like a storm. They had wiped out entire colonies, leaving nothing behind but rubble. The human fleet had managed to evade them for months, but now their luck could run out. "We need a plan," Davin said, her mind racing. "But conventional tactics aren't going to cut it. We're outgunned, outmanned, and outclassed. We need something different, something the Xalith won't see coming." Marlowe's expression shifted. A glint of hope flickered in his eyes. "There's something I've been working on, a secret project, the Silent Armada." Davin turned sharply to face him. "What is it?" "It's a fleet of stealth ships, Admiral," Marlowe explained, lowering his voice as if to guard the secrecy of the project. "Completely undetectable, no engines, no signals. They move in total silence. And the weapons, they are designed to incapacitate without ever firing a shot." "Silent ships?" Davin repeated, trying to comprehend. "Impossible. That kind of technology. We've been working on it for years, under the highest security protocols. It's untested, but it's our only shot. If we deploy it now, the Xalith won't even know what hit them." Davin stared at Marlowe, her mind spinning. It sounded like madness, but so was everything else humanity had tried so far. Conventional warfare had failed. The Silent Armada could be the answer. "How many ships are ready?" Davin asked, her voice steady. 3 dozen, stealth ships, all equipped with cloaking devices, silent weapons, and long-range sabotage capabilities, Marlowe answered. "They can slip past any detection, strike deep behind enemy lines, and vanish before the Xalith even know they're there." Davin's heart pounded in her chest. This was humanity's last chance. A silent army, moving unseen in the vastness of space, could be their final hope. "Prepare the fleet," Davin said. "We launch within the hour. I want every ship ready for deployment." Marlowe nodded and turned to make the necessary preparations. As he left, Davin stood motionless for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The Silent Armada was their only hope, but it was also their most dangerous gamble. If it failed, humanity would be wiped from the galaxy without a sound. The stars stretched out before the Silent Armada like a vast, unmarked canvas. As the fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, the ships glided through the darkness, unseen and unheard. They were ghostly specters, their cloaking systems rendering them nearly invisible to any standard scans or detection methods. Each vessel, sleek and black as the void, followed an intricate flight pattern, cutting through space with deadly precision. This was humanity's last desperate strike, an assault that would be whispered about in history if it succeeded. Admiral Kira Davin stood at the heart of the command ship, the Black Widow, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of the Xalith convoy. The fleet had been scouting for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The convoy, a massive supply train traveling between Xalith strongholds, was their first target. If they could cripple this critical artery, it would send a message to the enemy: humanity was not finished. All ships in position. Marlowe's voice crackled over the comms, his tone calm and focused. We're ready to engage. Davin's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. She knew this mission was a gamble. With no communication or visual confirmation until the attack was launched, the silent Armada had only one chance to succeed. A single mistake could betray their presence. It was a terrifying thought, but Davin pushed it from her mind. There was no turning back now. Deploy Phase 1, Davin ordered. All ships, move into strike position. One by one, the silent Armada slipped out of the dark void and into the path of the Xalith convoy, each ship perfectly synchronized. The cloaks rendered them invisible, but the operation wasn't without risk. The Xalith supply convoys were heavily guarded, with multiple layers of defense and automated tracking systems. The ships of the silent Armada had to remain silent and avoid triggering any alarms. On board the Black Widow, Marlowe monitored the convoy's movements. They're moving as expected. No sign of detection so far. ETA to target, 3 minutes. The tension in the command room was palpable, every officer aware of the gravity of the mission. The Xalith supply line was their lifeblood, and severing it would severely cripple their war machine. Davin knew the success of this mission could turn the tide of the entire conflict, but the stakes were high. Any sign of interference, any mistake, could cost them everything. At the designated moment, the silent Armada struck. Simultaneously, the ships launched a deadly barrage of electromagnetic pulses, disabling the Xalith convoy shields and rendering their engines inoperable. No explosions, no visible signs of attack, just a sudden, brutal halt to their movement. The Xalith were completely unaware. Phase 2, commence sabotage, Davin ordered. The silent vessels, now positioned perfectly within the crippled convoy, began their precise work. The ships moved swiftly, planting sabotage devices on key components of the Xalith transports. Without a sound, they incapacitated the life support systems, disrupted communication relays, and planted nanite-infused charges to disable the convoy's weapons and defensive systems. All ships, prepare to exfiltrate, Marlowe's voice echoed through the comms. The convoy was in chaos now, but the Xalith still hadn't realized they were under attack. The silent Armada's next task was even more critical: escape. With military precision, the ships reversed their positions, slowly and deliberately moving back into the void. The Xalith remained clueless to the identities of their attackers. The silent Armada was a phantom in the dark, vanishing without a trace, leaving nothing but the broken remains of the enemy's supplies behind. As the last ship of the Armada disappeared into the blackness, Davin allowed herself a small, fleeting moment of relief. They had succeeded, against all odds. The convoy was dead in space, its critical resources destroyed, and the Xalith would need weeks, if not months, to recover. "Admiral," Marlowe said, his voice filled with restrained triumph, "we've done it. The convoy is neutralized. We're clear." Davin's gaze remained fixed on the holographic display as the convoy's data was replaced with a new set of intel. The Xalith were already mobilizing a counterforce. They were not oblivious, and soon enough, they would know humanity's stealth fleet was no mere myth. The Silent Armada had made its first strike, but the war was far from over. What came next would be the true test of whether humanity could truly remain a shadow in the galaxy, or if the Ixalith would finally hunt them down. "Return to base," Davin commanded, her voice steady but filled with unspoken determination. "We've sent our message. Now let's prepare for the next round." As the Silent Armada faded into the black abyss, its ships vanished like whispers, leaving only echoes of their triumph. The Silent Armada returned to its hidden base, a concealed asteroid cluster on the fringes of the galaxy, where human forces had taken refuge for the past few years. The stealth ships slipped in undetected, their cloaks keeping them hidden from any Ixalith sensors that might have been in range. But even as they landed, a new reality began to settle in. What had once been an audacious plan was now humanity's only viable strategy, and the Ixalith were starting to take notice. Admiral Kira Davin sat in her private quarters, staring at the holographic display of the galaxy before her. The strike against the Ixalith convoy had been a resounding success, yet the exhilaration was short-lived. The Ixalith would not be caught off guard again. They would adapt, and humanity's remaining fleet would need to stay one step ahead to survive. "Admiral, you need to see this," Marlowe's voice crackled through the comms. Davin snapped her attention back to the task at hand. She walked swiftly to the bridge, where Marlowe was already awaiting her. His expression was grim as he showed her the latest satellite data. An enormous fleet of Ixalith ships now loomed on the edge of the asteroid cluster, just outside the radius of detection. "Are they aware of us?" Davin asked, her tone sharp with urgency. "No," Marlowe replied. "Not yet, but we're running out of time. They've intercepted some of our communications. It seems they've been watching for any signs of weakness. They're preparing for a massive counterattack." Davin's mind raced. The silence of their operations had kept them hidden until now, but with the Ixalith closing in, that silence would soon become their greatest vulnerability. The next strike would have to be decisive, something that would catch the Ixalith off guard again, something they could not adapt to. "We need to hit them hard," Davin muttered, almost to herself. "A decoy, something that will force their fleet to scatter and spread out. We need their ships far enough apart that they can't respond as one. Then we strike." Marlowe's eyes gleamed with a sudden understanding. "A diversion. If we can trigger a series of false targets simultaneously across their fleet, we might be able to disrupt their communication and force them to make mistakes." Davin nodded. "Exactly. We need their fleet to move in disarray. We'll split our forces and target weak points. When they can't regroup, we'll exploit it." She turned to her officers, their faces lit by the dim glow of the screens around them. "Get to work. Marlowe, I want you to coordinate the launch sequence. This time, we won't just disable them. We'll make sure they know who's hunting them." Minutes turned to hours as the crew worked tirelessly, preparing the next phase of their plan. The Silent Armada's fleet had been divided into smaller factions, each assigned to sabotage critical points in the Ixalith fleet. Some ships would attack with electromagnetic pulses to disable their communications, while others would launch decoy missiles that mimicked their signature. A few ships would infiltrate the enemy's ranks, planting false data streams and feeding the Ixalith false information. Every detail was accounted for, every move choreographed. Every ship would vanish without a trace. As the fleet prepared to launch, Davin felt the weight of the upcoming battle. She had seen her crew grow from mere survivors into the last hope of the human race. But every mission carried the chance of failure, and this time, with the Ixalith closing in, failure was not an option. "Phase 1 of the operation begins in 30 minutes, Marlowe said, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. "We're ready to move." Davin stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "Let's make sure they know the cost of underestimating us. No more mistakes." The Silent Armada, a fleet built to strike without a sound, would soon be heard throughout the galaxy. And this time, it would be the Xalith who would feel the echoes of humanity's vengeance. The silent Armada moved into position, each ship drifting like a shadow through the vastness of space, unseen and undetected. The Xalith fleet loomed just beyond the edge of the asteroid cluster, their massive warships patrolling in tight formation. From their position, the Armada could sense the Xalith's growing frustration. They knew something was out of place. The silence was unnerving. Admiral Kiera Davin stood in the center of the command room, watching the live feed of the Xalith fleet. Her plan was risky, but it was the only option they had left. The time for stealth and subtlety was over. Now they had to strike with everything they had and make sure the Xalith didn't have a chance to retaliate. "Status report," Davin said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the decision she had just made. Marlowe turned from his station, his face grim but resolute. "All ships are in position, Admiral. We're ready to trigger the decoy waves." "Do it," Davin ordered. The first wave of decoys was launched with precision, small, cloaked vessels that shot out toward the Xalith fleet like shooting stars, each carrying false signals designed to mimic the Armada's ships. The Xalith scanners flared to life, and within moments, the first round of confusion began. The enemy ships detected a dozen different signals, all too close to their own positions, each one a potential threat. Davin watched as the Xalith commanders reacted, dividing their fleet into smaller groups, sending out squads of fighters to intercept the false targets. It was exactly what they'd hoped for. The Xalith were now disoriented, stretched thin across a wide area. "Phase 2, engage," Davin said, her voice a steady command. At once, the silent Armada's smaller strike groups surged forward, cutting through the fractured Xalith fleet with deadly precision. The Black Widow led the charge, its sleek form slipping into the midst of the disorganized enemy. As the ship neared its target, a Xalith cruiser, Davin gave the order. "Electromagnetic pulse, fire." A powerful pulse erupted from the Black Widow, cascading over the Xalith cruiser. The ship shuddered and lost all power, drifting helplessly in the vacuum of space, the first of many. "Confirmed hit on target," Marlowe reported. "They're falling apart. Communications are down. We've got them." But Davin knew better than to relax. This was only the beginning. The Xalith might be confused, but they were not blind. They would regroup, and when they did, the Armada would have to be ready to strike again. "Prepare for the next wave," Davin instructed. "We'll hit them hard before they can recover." But as the Armada's next wave of attacks began, Davin received an unexpected transmission. It was faint, distorted, but it was unmistakably from the Xalith flagship. "Admiral," Marlowe said, his voice sharp with concern, "they're starting to counterattack. It's a trap." Davin's eyes narrowed as she analyzed the incoming signal. The Xalith had anticipated the decoys. They had laid a trap of their own, a fleet of cloaked warships, hidden in the asteroid field, ready to spring the moment they struck. "We've walked right into their hands," Davin muttered, a chill creeping up her spine. "Full evasive maneuvers. Turn the fleet around now." But it was too late. The Xalith ships emerged from the shadows of the asteroid field with ruthless efficiency. The silent Armada, caught off guard by the ambush, found itself surrounded. The Xalith were no longer confused. They had adapted to the pattern of the decoys and were now closing in fast. "Get us out of here, Marlowe," Davin barked, her mind racing. Marlowe's fingers flew across the controls, but the Xalith ships had already cut off their escape routes. The silent Armada was now engaged in a full-scale battle, the once silent ships firing back at their assailants with everything they had. The vacuum of space rang with the hum of energy blasts, as the delicate dance of shadows turned into a brutal clash of wills. "We're outnumbered," Marlowe said, frustration in his voice. "They've anticipated our every move." "Then we make them regret it," Davin said, determination hardening her voice. "Fight with everything we've got. We may be surrounded, but they'll never see us coming. The silent Armada, its stealth no longer a guarantee of safety, had entered the chaos of battle. And now it would be their will to survive that would decide the outcome. The battle was unfolding at a terrifying pace. Energy blasts crackled through space, lighting up the dark expanse as the silent Armada, once masters of stealth, now fought desperately to break free of the Xalith trap. The enemy's warships, lurking just beyond the asteroid field, unleashed wave after wave of concentrated fire, each shot a testament to their calculated strategy. But the silent Armada was not without its teeth. Humanity's ships fought back fiercely, their advanced technology outpacing the Xalith's older designs, but it was a fight they had not planned for. Admiral Kiera Davin stood at the center of the command room, her mind a battlefield of its own. She had never anticipated being surrounded so quickly, and now every decision she made had the weight of humanity's future on it. The Xalith were relentless, their superior numbers closing in, but Davin refused to back down. She would not allow humanity's last hope to be extinguished in this godforsaken corner of the galaxy. "Marlowe," she said, her voice calm but steely, "activate the secondary cloaking array. We need to buy ourselves some time." Marlowe hesitated for a moment, staring at the chaotic feed in front of him. The Xalith were relentless, but they were also focused on the wrong target. "Admiral, are you sure? We're low on energy reserves, and if we trigger the secondary cloak now, we won't have enough power for another engagement." "We have no choice," Davin replied firmly. "Do it." Marlowe's fingers danced over the control panel, and the Black Widow and the rest of the fleet's ships flickered briefly before vanishing once again into the cold black of space, hidden from the Xalith's watchful eyes. The sudden silence in the control room was deafening. For a brief moment, the battle stopped. The Xalith, now unable to detect the Armada, grew cautious. Davin watched, her heart pounding in her chest. The brief respite wouldn't last long. They had only moments before the Xalith realized the cloaking field wasn't an illusion, but a direct move by the fleet. They would adapt, and when they did, there would be no time left for clever tactics. "We need to launch a decoy within 5 minutes," Davin said, her mind calculating the next move. "Marlowe, can we trigger the pulse from within the cloaking field?" "We can, but it will drain all remaining reserves. Once we fire, we'll have no time to hide again." Davin knew the risks, but it was the only option left. She'd seen too many ships, too many lives, lost in this war to let hesitation dictate their fate. "Do it." Within moments, the silent Armada's cloaked ships were scattered across the battlefield once again, taking different positions in the asteroid field as they prepared to strike the Xalith where they least expected it. Marlowe initiated the electromagnetic pulse sequence, and as the pulse washed out across the Xalith's fleet, every ship in their ranks shuddered as power flickered. The Armada's momentary advantage was as sharp as it was fleeting. The Xalith retaliated quickly, firing blindly in the direction of the now faded pulse. But the silent Armada had already moved, disappearing once more into the void. For a moment, the Xalith fleet was in disarray, its ships firing wildly, unable to pinpoint the humans' positions. Davin's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold on the holo display. This was their chance. "Phase 3, Davin called out. "We're not running anymore. We hit them now, and we hit them hard." The order was given, and the silent Armada, empowered by the brief distraction, surged forward. The Xalith were still recovering from the electromagnetic disruption, but this time the human ships were not scattering, they were targeting. The battle shifted from a desperate retreat to a focused assault. The Black Widow led the charge, its sleek hull cutting through the stars, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. For every Xalith cruiser that was disabled, for every ship that fell silent into the abyss, the silent Armada grew more confident. But Davin knew better than to get lost in the euphoria of victory. The Xalith would adapt. They always did. This battle was just one small victory in a much larger war. Report, Davin barked as the battle raged on. We're pushing them back, Admiral, Marlowe replied. But they're not going down without a fight. Their reinforcements are on the way. Davin's lips tightened into a determined line. We have to end this. We strike hard enough to break them. No retreat. She turned to the crew, every face a mask of determination. This is humanity's last stand. We take this victory, not for us, but for everyone who's depending on us. With a rallying cry, the silent Armada fought on, an unstoppable force, made silent by their stealth, but with a roar that could shatter the heavens themselves. The Ixalith would soon know the true meaning of humanity's strength, and this time, silence would be their greatest weapon. The battle had taken on a new rhythm, one of calculated chaos. The silent Armada, their cloaking devices now firing off sporadic pulses to mask their movements, danced in and out of the fray like ghosts in a storm. The Ixalith, although disoriented by the earlier electromagnetic pulse, were regrouping, pushing their fleet into tight formations, adapting with unnerving speed. Admiral Davin watched the battle unfold through a steady, unwavering gaze. She could feel the pulse of the fleet, the adrenaline coursing through the crew, but there was a quietness to it now. The real war, the war for humanity's survival, was being fought at the edges of silence. We've inflicted serious damage, Admiral, Marlowe reported, his voice tight but focused. But they've adapted faster than we anticipated. Their cruisers are consolidating around their flagship. Davin nodded grimly. The Ixalith were no strangers to warfare, and their tactical genius was beginning to show. They're going to try to lure us in, she muttered under her breath. They think they can trap us. We need to make them think we're falling for it. Her hands moved swiftly over the command console. Initiate evasive maneuvers, she ordered. Send a false wave out toward the edge of their formation, just enough to bait them. Marlowe's fingers flew over the controls, and the Black Widow veered sharply, firing off a series of pulses that shot outward, creating the illusion of weakness in the Armada's ranks. The false trail led the Ixalith to believe that the humans were attempting to escape, and in their arrogance, they followed. Their fleet split once again, sending out smaller, faster ships to chase down the supposed retreating threat. Davin's heart pounded as she watched the Ixalith split their forces, their ships now spread thin across the battlefield. It was the moment they had been waiting for. Now, she commanded. The silent Armada surged forward, cutting through the darkness with deadly speed. Every ship was aligned perfectly, moving as one, a sleek and deadly machine of destruction. They tore into the exposed flank of the Ixalith fleet, the sudden onslaught catching them completely off guard. The Ixalith flagship, the Zarian, stood in the center of their formation, surrounded by layers of defensive ships. But as the silent Armada began to strike, the Zarian was left isolated, vulnerable. Target the Zarian, Davin said, her voice cold as she watched the enemy flagship. We end this here. The Black Widow led the charge, its weapon systems locking onto the flagship's exposed weak points. Davin's hands were steady as she issued the command, her voice a final death knell for the Ixalith. All ships, focus fire on the Zarian. Take it down, now. The Black Widow released a torrent of energy blasts, followed by missile barrages that hit their mark. The Zarian's shields flickered, struggling to absorb the sudden onslaught. The rest of the silent Armada followed suit, every ship launching its own barrage toward the crippled flagship. The Zarian was taking damage, heavy damage, and Davin could see it in the flashing red lights across the command display. The Ixalith flagship was on the verge of collapse. But then, a sudden shift in the battlefield caused Davin to freeze. From the depths of the asteroid field, a hidden reserve of Salith warships emerged, cutting through the void like a predator's final strike. Their sudden appearance, perfectly timed to coincide with the Zarian's vulnerability, was a calculated play. They've been holding back their reinforcements, Marlowe gasped. It's a trap again. Damn it, Davin growled, her fingers tightening around the edge of her chair. The Xalif had anticipated this move, planning for every contingency. Engage evasive maneuvers. Get us out of here. But it was too late. The Xalif ships, newly revealed and positioned in the perfect ambush, closed in around the silent Armada. The Black Widow veered to the side, dodging a series of energy blasts that tore through the empty space where it had just been. Several ships in the fleet took direct hits, their shields disintegrating under the intense fire. "We've lost 2 of our strike groups," Marlowe shouted, his face contorted in disbelief. "They've boxed us in. We're surrounded." Davin's pulse quickened as she stared at the enemy ships closing in, each of them seemingly unstoppable. The silent Armada had fought valiantly, but now it seemed that they had underestimated the Xalith's resilience. "Not yet," Davin muttered. "We're not done yet." She activated the emergency signal, sending a blast of energy toward their own fleet's command center, a signal to rally the remaining ships. With their back against the wall, the silent Armada would make one final push. This was humanity's last chance to finish what they had started. "Break through their lines," Davin ordered, her voice raw with resolve. "We fight our way out. Now." The silence that had defined the silent Armada now shattered into a cacophony of destruction. The Xalith, their trap set and seemingly about to close, had underestimated one critical element of the human spirit: the refusal to surrender. The fleet, battered and surrounded, fought with a ferocity born from desperation. Admiral Kira Davin, standing resolute at the heart of the chaos, knew this was the moment that would define humanity's future, if they could survive it. The Black Widow swerved, narrowly avoiding the deadly energy beam that tore through the space where it had just been. Davin's hands moved with practiced precision, issuing commands that sent the ship into an aggressive evasive maneuver. The ship's hull groaned under the strain as the crew followed their orders without hesitation. "All ships, we break out," Davin shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "No more retreating. Push forward." In response, the remaining vessels of the silent Armada moved as one, weaving between the asteroid field and the Xalith's encroaching warships. The ships that had once struck without a sound now cut through the darkness with an urgency that spoke volumes. Each one released precise, calculated blasts, targeting weak points in the enemy ship's formations. Every shot was a gamble, for they had little fuel left to sustain the engagement, but the Armada pressed on, driven by the will to survive. "Admiral," Marlowe said urgently, his voice filled with concern, "we've got less than 30 minutes of power left in the reserves. After that, we won't be able to cloak. We won't be able to move fast enough to avoid their fire." "Then we make these last minutes count," Davin replied, her gaze unwavering. "Tell the fleet to focus everything on breaking through their lines. This is our final strike." A ripple of tense silence spread through the command room as the fleet's remaining ships, knowing the gravity of the situation, responded in unison. Each of them understood. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a battle to take the Xalith down once and for all. The Black Widow surged forward, cutting through the enemy ranks like a knife through water. Energy blasts and missiles streamed from its hull, slamming into the Xalith vessels with the force of 1,000 storms. The enemy warships faltered as their shields buckled under the assault, but their retaliation was swift and merciless. A volley of energy beams whizzed past the Black Widow, grazing its starboard side and sending a shudder through its frame. The ship groaned in protest, but it didn't slow down. "Status on the flagship," Davin demanded, her focus narrowing to the Zarian. Marlowe's fingers danced over the console. "It's still there, Admiral, but its shields are barely holding up. They're trying to retreat, but their engines are damaged." "Perfect," Davin murmured, eyes flashing with determination. "They think they can get away." The Black Widow was already locked onto the Zarian. The enemy flagship, though damaged, still posed a serious threat. Its firepower was unmatched, and if it managed to regroup, It would be devastating, but Davin wasn't about to let that happen. Full power to forward shields, Davin barked. Target the Zarian's propulsion systems. Take their engines out. The ship's weapon systems hummed to life as the Black Widow fired off a series of focused shots. The Xalith flagship shuddered under the assault, but it didn't break. The enemy's retaliation was swift. Massive bursts of energy from their remaining battleships rained down upon the silent Armada, the force of the blasts shaking the hull of the Black Widow. Systems flickered and warning alarms screamed in Davin's ears, but she gritted her teeth and held her ground. Focus fire on the Zarian, Davin repeated. We take it down now, or we'll never get another chance. Marlowe nodded, his fingers flying across the panel, directing every remaining weapon toward the Xalith flagship. The Black Widow's turrets unleashed a final barrage, their lasers tearing through the Zarian's weakened shields. With a deafening, violent explosion, the flagship's engines ignited, the Zarian's once mighty form crumbling under the concentrated firepower. The Xalith flagship was no more. A triumphant cheer erupted in the command room, but Davin's eyes remained cold, focused. She knew this battle wasn't over yet. The remaining Xalith fleet, now leaderless and scrambling, attempted to regroup. But with their flagship gone, their discipline faltered, and their defenses became a crumbling structure in the wake of humanity's fury. The silent Armada seized upon this weakness, surging forward like a storm. We've broken their lines, Admiral, Marlowe reported, his voice now tinged with relief. They're in full retreat. Davin allowed herself a brief, tight smile. Not yet. We finish this now. We don't let them recover. The remaining Xalith warships, now disoriented and vulnerable, were picked off one by one. The silent Armada, battered but unbroken, continued its relentless advance, leaving no room for mercy. The battle, once a near-hopeless fight for survival, had become a decisive victory. But even as Davin watched the final ships of the Xalith retreat into the depths of space, she knew that the war was far from over. The silent Armada had struck without a sound, but the echoes of their victory would be felt across the galaxy for years to come. And in that silence, humanity's future would be secured. The final remnants of the Xalith fleet vanished into the black expanse of space, their retreating forms flickering like fading stars. The battlefield, once alive with the roar of conflict, now lay eerily still, as if the universe itself held its breath. The silent Armada, battered and scared, drifted in the vast emptiness, the hum of their remaining systems the only sound breaking the quiet. Admiral Kira Davin stood at the helm of the Black Widow, her eyes fixed on the fading traces of the enemy ships. They had won, but at what cost? Admiral, Marlowe's voice broke the silence, his tone cautious yet laced with a quiet awe. We did it. The Xalith are done. Their fleet is shattered. We've won. Davin's gaze hardened, the weight of the moment settling upon her. The victory was undeniable, but it came at a heavy price. The silent Armada had sustained significant losses. Out of the 20 ships that had launched the assault, only 7 remained, their hulls battered and scorched from the relentless battle. Some of the ships were barely operational, their systems failing as they limped through the void, but they had held the line long enough to defeat an enemy that had once seemed unstoppable. We've won, Davin echoed softly, more to herself than to anyone else. But the war is far from over. Marlowe hesitated, sensing her uncertainty. What do you mean, Admiral? Davin turned to face him, her eyes hard with determination. The Xalith may have retreated, but they're not defeated. This war, this galaxy-wide conflict, isn't over by a long shot. This victory doesn't erase the fact that we are in the crosshairs of the most ruthless species the galaxy has ever known. The crew of the Black Widow murmured in agreement. Though their morale had soared when the Xalith flagship, the Zarian, had been destroyed, the reality of what lay ahead had not escaped them. This was merely one battle in a war that spanned light years. We'll need to rebuild, Davin continued, her voice hardening with resolve. We'll need to fortify our fleets, rebuild our alliances, and strengthen the defense systems of Earth and its colonies. The Ixalith might be down, but they'll be back, and when they do, we'll be ready. Her words were met with a determined nod from Marlowe and the rest of the bridge crew. The fight for survival had only just begun, but the silent Armada had proven something crucial in this battle. Humanity could stand against any threat, even the most seemingly insurmountable ones. It wasn't just the technology or the strength of their ships. It was the sheer willpower, the refusal to break under pressure, and the undying spirit of the people aboard those ships that had made the difference. We'll rebuild, Marlowe said, a fierce glint in his eyes, and when they return, we'll strike harder. Davin's lips twitched into a grim smile. We will, but first, we celebrate. We've earned it. As the fleet began its slow return to Earth, the survivors of the silent Armada allowed themselves a brief moment of relief. The damage to the ships would take time to repair, and the crew would need to recover from the emotional and physical toll of the battle. But for now, they could savor their victory. The Ixalith had been sent a message. The silent Armada was not a force to be underestimated. Back on Earth, a wave of relief washed over the population as news of the victory spread. People who had once lived in fear of the Ixalith threat now dared to hope. The silent Armada had shown them that humanity could hold its ground against even the most fearsome enemies. But as Davin watched the stars through the observation window of the Black Widow, she knew that the true test of humanity's strength was yet to come. The Ixalith were only one of many enemies lurking in the shadows of the galaxy, and now humanity had shown that it would not just survive, it would thrive. For the first time in her career, Davin felt a flicker of hope, a hope that echoed through the silence. Humanity's legacy was just beginning, and the stars, once distant and cold, now seemed just within reach. We're not just survivors, she whispered to herself. We're warriors, and we'll shape the future on our terms. As the Black Widow and the rest of the silent Armada drifted back toward home, the echoes of their victory spread across the galaxy, a promise the humanity's will could not be silenced.